Welcome everybody to our first Fill That Gap YouTube live Q&A event. This is a three-part series and aims to give you ideas on how to improve feed and nutrient efficiency while increasing on-farm environmental outcomes. My name's Amy Dawson and I work in the Science Extension team for Ballance Agri-Nutrients based down here in Canterbury, and I'll be chairing today's session. So with challenging conditions around most of New Zealand this season, we know that winter feed crop yields are lower than we've expected, and we've also got an increase of stock on hand due to decreased throughputs due to COVID-19 at the works. So winter crops may have been grazed earlier than expected, and if we couple this with a fast approaching winter, it could mean that you're short of feed or potentially have bare soil exposed moving into those wetter, cooler months. To add to this, we've had the recent announcement last week on the National Freshwater Policy, and there's going to be a rule around winter grazing with a practice standard of no bare soil for longer than 1 month post-winter grazing. So this discussion on catch and cover crops is highly relevant and timely. So this technology has been pretty well researched, and we'll hear today from Plant and Food Research Scientist Brendon Malcolm and Science Extension Officer Murray Lane on the science, principles, first steps and farm system fit of catch and cover crops. So please ask any questions as we go through on the chat bar on YouTube, and we'll answer them as we move through the discussion or at the end. So we'll start off with a few introductions. So Murray, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, Amy. Thank you. Yeah, Amy, I guess I've been with Ballance Agri-Nutrients and the Science Extension team in the North Island, and my background, I guess, is DuPont and Monsanto R&D, doing pesticides for a number of years, South Island and North Island, and more recently, Lightseed Seeds and now Ballance.
Nice. And Brendon, do you want to tell us about yourself and what you're currently working on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I work for Plant and Food Research as a scientist. I guess most of my science is on our soil science and also crop science. And really the focus in the last few years has been around winter grazing and trying to get an idea on how much is actually leaching from these crops, and also what we can do about trying to reduce the leaching losses. So a lot of work trying to use crops such as catch crops to pick some of that nitrogen up out of the ground. So yeah, that's been my focus the last few years.
Cool. So we're talking today about catch and cover crops. So Murray, do you want to just tell us maybe what's the difference between a catch and a cover crop?
Yeah, essentially what are we trying to do here? We're trying to protect the soil, pull back nitrogen, and prevent soil leaving. So the work that Brendon's doing is focusing on nitrogen recovery, putting seeds in the ground, and so that's called a catch crop. When we come around and look at what is a cover crop, the catch crop will cover the soil as well, but the cover crop is primarily looking at can we protect the soil from the energy of the rain droplet and also hold the soil together with the roots. So the work we've been doing with helicopters is on broken land, variable slope land where you can't get machines in the wintertime. So essentially we're calling it a cover crop to protect that soil by broadcasting seed onto the surface.
Cool. So I guess it's really the purpose that you're sowing it for will determine what you're going to be calling it. So Brendon, Murray mentioned you've been working quite a bit on catch crops for a number of years. So what's some of the key findings in your research?
Yeah, sure. So the work that we've done on catch crops has really been trying to reduce, as I said earlier, the losses from winter grazing, and so that actually means trying to get the catch crop in the ground in the middle of winter. So, and what we've been able to do that, we've had a number of trials over the years now where we've been trying to sow in June or July or August, and the results are showing that we can reduce leaching losses by up to about 50%. But obviously it very much depends on the year. It depends on the amount of rainfall, the timing of when that rainfall occurs, depends on when you get your crop in the ground, and also depends on things like the soil type and the region. And so there's a whole lot of factors that actually come into play here. I guess one of the key learnings though, and which was quite interesting to us, is that is to sow that catch crop as soon after grazing as possible. So even if the paddock is available in June, it's important to get the crop in the ground then. Even by delaying by a month, even at that time of year, it does reduce the effectiveness of the catch crop. So that is one of the keys, is trying to get it in the ground as soon as possible after grazing. And the other one is around crop selection. So The cereals we've found to have been a lot better than, say, the ryegrasses. They're a bigger seed. They can handle the conditions in the winter time a lot better than the ryegrasses. They germinate, establish, and they take up more nitrogen. So we've been doing a lot of work with oats, but there are other cereals out there as well. But it's really, so just coming back to that key message, it's getting the crop in the ground early, and it's selecting the right one, and that tends to be one of the other cereals. Yeah.
And most of your research has occurred in the South Island, hasn't it, Brendon, where we've got a lot cooler climates?
Yes, that's right. So quite a lot of our research has been in Canterbury, but we have been able to show that we can actually establish these catch crops in Southland as well. So, we can sow in July in Southland, and then it takes about a month for the crop to even show itself. But yeah, it emerges. It starts to grow, albeit very slowly, during that late winter period, but it's actually doing something then. So yeah, even when the crop is not very big, it is actually doing something in terms of reducing the amount of nitrogen that is leached.
Yeah, and Murray, the work you've been looking at, you mentioned it already earlier around helicropping, but particularly around cover crops, that's more in the North Island. Do you want to maybe comment on maybe how that's a little bit different?
Yeah, I guess we initiated this whole project maybe 20 years ago, almost that time frame, where we were looking at, can we grow small seeded forage crops? And we've shown that we can do that. Now the challenge is, can we now keep the soil on the land when you harvest it through the winter? So again, continuing to use helicopters, we've been broadcasting seed on the surface with various species to see what we can achieve. And Brendon's right when he talks about the using cereal seeds, because they're bigger seeds, they've got more vigor, etc. And that's when they're placed in the ground. But when you broadcast them on the surface, the challenge is they're more susceptible to bird predation. So where we're at is we've tried oats, we've tried plantain, we've tried annual grasses, annual ryegrasses. And the annual ryegrasses seem to be the one that gives us the cover and the protection by broadcasting on the surface. It doesn't mean to say we don't have bird predation. We need to do a lot more work on overcoming that.
And warmer climates, I guess, potentially lean towards maybe the ryegrasses establishing a lot better as well?
Possibly, but the work we've been doing has been on the central plateau where it gets really cool.
Nice. So in terms of farm system fit, how do we decide which species to sow? Like we've sort of mentioned already, temperature, but would establishment method also tie into that, Brendon?
Yeah, so there's certainly no one size fits all here. It really depends on the system, the crop that you're grazing over winter and what you intend to do with the land afterwards. And it also depends on what the soil conditions are at the time. So in some instances, say like after a heavy fodder beet crop, you might actually need to do some more soil preparation just to make sure that you get that good sort of seed contact. So it really just depends. I mean, yeah, I think that is certainly one of the keys, which I didn't talk about earlier, is trying to make sure that you get really good sort of seed contact. But as little cultivation as possible is also key, so that we don't sort of mineralize in more nitrogen and add more nitrogen to the system that could be leached. But in terms of the cereals, I guess the beauty about them is that we can take them at different stages. They're quite well suited to either being grazed or being taken for green chop, or some crops can be taken through to whole crop or even grain. So wheats and barleys can even be used as a catch crop and be taken through to grain. So that's certainly an option. Another option that some farmers are using, and what we've started to trial, is putting some ryegrass, some winter active ryegrass in with the mix and with the oats as such. And then that means that when we take the oats for a silage in springtime or late spring, we then get the regrowth from the ryegrass. So that means that the farmer doesn't have to go straight in and try and sow their winter crop. Then they might actually take some cuts, or they might actually graze the ryegrass through into autumn and then re-sow then. Otherwise, like catch crops do fit quite well into a kale rotation, so because we can afford to delay when we sow the kale. So and what we've been able to show is that if you do a delay when the kale is established, then the production from the oats more than compensates any yield losses in that kale crop. It's not such a good fit. It's a little bit tricky to fit it into a fodder beet rotation, if you like, because it's really important to get that beet in the ground early to capture that yield from the beet, because it's such a high costing crop. But that is the other good thing with the cereals, is that there's a whole range of ways that we can use the crop at the end of the day.
And Murray, we might get a bit onto it in our next Q&A next week, but do you want to just mention maybe some of the work you've been doing around co-establishment and how that's helped with cover cropping?
Yeah, well, thanks, Amy. So farmers have given us a lead. You turn up on somebody's property and they've grown Swedes with plantains, for example, as a companion crop. And it's been quite exciting to watch how they graze it. Some farmers would graze it and the plantain would disappear. Maybe a recovery from seeds established over the growing of that sweet crop. Others have grazed it in such a way that the plantain still exists after the grazing, and then it comes away very quickly afterward. Within weeks, you've got a green cover over the soil again. So that's something we're looking at as an opportunity for establishing the cover crop at the same time as you sow the Swedes. We've recently done some work looking at the impact of growing the plantain with the Swedes. Does it impact the yield of the Swede? And I mean, going through a summer drought on the Central Plateau, it appears like it hasn't impacted the yield of the Swedes. The Swedes are a lower yield in both plantain and non-plantain areas than was expected, but essentially there's no impact on them. So it's something to look forward to. And here we are talking about establishing the cover crop with the Swede crop. It wouldn't work so well under kale, because kale is just too much light shading, and therefore you wouldn't get the plantain growing. But then it still doesn't prevent you from putting ryegrass seed in after the grazing, to then come back and have a plantain and the winter ryegrass crop as you progress through the rest of the winter.
So we mentioned the recent rule changes last week, which are pretty timely. So how can we use some of this information we've talked about today around to ensure that farmers meet that 1 month post-grazing, winter grazing for bare soil? Do you want to maybe start with that, Brendon?
Yeah, I guess it's just trying to set the paddock up so that you can get on the ground. So I know that that some farmers, after the cows have grazed, they'll even come back pretty frequently and just quickly rip the ground just to allow a little bit of drainage to occur. So then that top part of the soil is drying out that little bit faster, and it means you can get on earlier. So that is one way of doing it, I guess. Yeah, and I guess if the conditions are not ideal, then just putting some more seed in would be good as well, because I think that's one of the key things is to make sure that you've got enough plants in the ground to be able to do the job. And we've seen through a trial that we ran last year that if the populations are too low, each individual plant just does not do so well. It hasn't got the sort of competition around it to get that vigor going. So having the plants in the ground, having a high population is important. So I don't know what your thoughts are there, Murray. Have you got any more to add to that?
Yeah, actually, Amy, I'd like you to bring up that photograph we talked about just for a moment, because it will give a level of this is a photograph from the first work we started a couple of years ago, and the left-hand side of that is where we put no seed in the middle of winter. The right-hand side was grazed Swedes. The right-hand side was grazed Swedes, and we broadcast annual ryegrass onto that area on the 11th of July. The photo was taken in October. You can see that you can achieve quite a lot. But as Brendon said earlier, it takes a long time to get to this point. Initially, it's very slow. But at the end of the day, you've achieved something. Now, this situation was between a sweet crop and a kale crop. So it was definitely going to be just a cover crop to protect the soil before being terminated, to then re-establish a kale crop and carry on. But if it was going into a single-year sweet crop and then into a perennial pasture, that grass on the right-hand side could easily have been the perennial pasture sown on the 11th of July and progressing through from then. So, I mean, we're all being challenged now to put seed on within a month. Will it make a difference? And potentially it could make a difference. We just need to, I think, the key element is overcoming the predators, one of them being the bird. Millions of birds.
So yeah, particularly Murray, I guess this year where we have had some crops graze a lot earlier than expected. I mean, sowing some annual ryegrass in pretty soon would add some value come late winter, early spring.
Absolutely. Certainly by September, October, you've got a grazeable option in the northern North Island. And Central Plateau, I'm not sure about South America.
Definitely. So, I mean, we've talked about some pretty harsh winter conditions that are coming up. If we sow a crop and it is particularly a harsh condition, are we still going to see some form of a benefit?
Yeah, I think so. Obviously, it will depend on just how harsh those conditions are. But I mean, like some of our trials have been underwater for like a month. So we've been able to get the seed down to at least 3 to 4 centimetres. So we've done all that we can to successfully sow the crop. And then it's just rained and have had lots of rain. But because we've used oats, one of the cereals, they have survived. I mean, they're not always going to survive. It's not always going to work. So there might be sort of like 1 year in 10 or even like more where it does not work. But the oats and the cereals can actually withstand some pretty harsh winter conditions. And actually, I'm just thinking now of one of our first trials in Southland. I think we had 2 or 3 snow events on that crop during the winter. So, and we still got, if I remember rightly, about 8 or 9 tonne from some of those plots. So I think that the mindset really has to be just to try and drill the crop as best you can to get that really good sort of seed contact, and then hope and pray that Mother Nature sort of does its thing and allows that crop to establish.
What about the North Island Murray with some of the heli cropping or the broadcasting sites? Have we had harsh winter conditions and still seen a good crop yield, or something out the other end?
Yes, actually, whenever the seeds establish, they end up looking like that photographs we're talking about. But I think the general concept here is, are we interested in protecting the soil? Now, as a farmer, you own the soil. Are you going to protect that soil or let it just quietly disappear over the years? So putting a cover catch crop in is going to help you protect that soil. It's not perfect, but it's on the way. There's another concept we could be playing with, and that is, instead of break feeding the crop behind the animals behind one wire, where we're optimizing the crop, perhaps we can look at it from the point of view of block feeding the crop. So you give them 4 days grazing, and it might be because the weather is coming in, you move them at 3 days. And I've seen it happening on the Central Plateau where the animals settle down, they're very relaxed, they're lying down chewing the cud. The weather comes in, you give them that extra day, you move them a day earlier, you can come back and pick up that grazing area afterwards. Whether that works in the heavy soils of the Southland, I'm not sure, but certainly the free draining soils of Central Plateau and maybe Canterbury, it would be a fine option.
So maybe if we think about catch or cover cropping where it potentially has gone wrong, and some of those key learnings that farmers could take away to implement. So maybe starting with you, Brendon, has there been any trials or anything you've been involved with where you thought, we could have done that a little bit differently and had some learning?
Yeah, I mean, yep. So I've seen some trials and some paddocks which have failed, that we haven't got the catch crop established, and it either comes down to the timing. So the crop is just too slow getting into the ground, although obviously the crop will still sort of come away, but in terms of what it can do to reduce leaching, it's because it's too slow getting in the ground. And the other reason is seeing farmers try to take some shortcuts, and so just not really paying close enough attention to detail in terms of trying to get that seed down to a good consistent 3 to 4 centimetres depth at high enough populations, using a certified seed that has good early vigour. And also, we've also seen trials or areas where the weeds haven't been controlled enough. So even though it is the middle of winter, still it is important to try and knock any weed out, just to really let the canopy establish, because the weeds can start to compete with those catch crops early on. But it really just comes down to either the delay in when the crop is sown, or just a few too many shortcuts. Because I usually really got to actually try and treat it as a crop. So doing the best that you can to sow and manage the crop really.
Mm, mm. And Murray, in our last Q&A session we have on the 24th of June, we'll go into detail around how to helicrop. But is there any particular learnings you've seen around catch or cover cropping that farmers can learn from?
Yes, well, I think in the short term, the challenge is bird predation. Can we overcome it? Because we've been broadcasting the seed on the surface quite differently.
Yeah.
Brendon's doing. And we have a tool which we'll be evaluating this season, a thing called Power. It's being used to protect native birds in the forests with 1080 treated cereal grain, so we're assuming it'll work in our environment. It's about just getting the seed on sooner rather than later, as Brendon was saying. It's going to, the sooner you get it on there, the better effect it's going to have as you progress into the winter.
Yep.
No, that's cool. Oh, it seems like we've sort of come to an end here. We haven't had any questions come through, but that's okay.
No
We've had
questions.
some discussion anyway. Yeah, so thanks to everyone for joining us today on our first of our three-part series. Some really good points from both Brendon and Murray, and I guess in summary it's around sowing as early as possible, potentially where we have harsher conditions using higher seeding rates, and looking for that soil to seed contact, particularly where we're drilling, and when we're broadcasting, I guess it's watching out for that bird predation. And selecting the appropriate species for your climate as well and what you're trying to achieve, whether it be catch or cover or feed for spring or in between two winter crops. So we encourage you to share this talk with other farmers or rural professionals. There will be a video on our YouTube channel that you can share. And just to let you know, this series is part of a wider Sustainable Farming Fund project looking into helicropping, farm system fit, and developing tools and advice around helicropping. So we'd like to thank our sponsors, which you can see on the screen, particularly MPI, Beef and Lamb, Agricom, PG Rights and Seeds, and the Bay of Plenty Regional Council. And for more information on the project, you can go to our website, which is www.balance.co.nz/helicropping. So thank you, everybody, and we hope to see you next week when we look at establishment from the air. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.